Deku? I think he's some pro. By Clouds. My Head in the Clouds Not Coming Down. Chapter 17. UA. Izuku took a deep breath before stepping through the front gates of UA. He was finally here. He hunched his shoulders slightly, trying to avoid as many other students as possible as he made his way to the main building. Maybe that nice girl Yayorozu from the entrance exam would be in his class. Maybe Ka-chan wouldn't be. Izuku shook his head. He shouldn't get his hopes up. As he climbed the front steps, he fiddled with the tie that he just hadn't managed to get right before coming to school today. Unfortunately, with his eyes busy looking at his neck, he didn't manage to see the last step. What a way to begin his first day at UA. Izuku tried to maneuver his momentum into a roll, like Joke always told him to do if he was falling on a parkour run. But instead of the familiar feeling of a cement landing, he found himself turning over and over again in midair. "Oh, I'm so sorry," a girl's voice said. "I was just trying to catch you using my quirk because I didn't think falling on the first day of school was a good omen. I'm so sorry. I've messed everything up." Izuku had now managed to right himself and was floating in midair, sitting cross-legged and smiling at the trippy feeling of hovering several feet above the ground. "You have some sort of anti-gravity quirk, right? That's so cool." She looks at him with wide eyes. "You don't mind?" Izuku shook his head. "I'm a little dizzy, but otherwise this is fun. You have such an awesome quirk." The girl smiled and pressed her fingers together, and Izuku felt the gravity suddenly return as he landed in a crouch. It must have been some kind of 5-point contact quirk. "My name is Ochaka Uraraka," she said, as Izuku stood and brushed himself off. "What's your name?" "Izuku Midoriya." Izuku was thankful that being around Joke and her incessant flirting had somewhat desensitized him to talking to women. Otherwise he'd be a mess right now. Where are you headed? What class are you in?" Uraraka smiled. "Class 1A. I really only passed the exam by the skin of my teeth. That 0-pointer was something else, wasn't it?" Izuku rubbed the back of his neck as they started walking. "Actually, I wouldn't know. I was admitted on recommendation, so our exams were a little different. You guys fought robots, right?" Uraraka nodded. "Yup, it was insane! There were different sizes and strengths of robots, all worth different point values, but then there was this 0-point robot. You think it'd be tiny, right? Just something to trip over and get in the way, but it was the size of some of the buildings. I got trapped under some rubble and had already gone over my quirk limits." She shuddered. "I managed to scrounge up just enough strength to use my quirk to escape and run away before it crushed me, but I ended up passing out for about 5 hours after the exam. The lecture recovery girl gave me was almost as scary as the 0-pointer. Izuku nodded. "Yeah, she can be pretty intimidating when people don't take care of themselves. I really never want to get on her bad side." They kept chatting idly as they tried to find the 1A classroom without getting lost. They got there a few moments before the bell, and Uraraka opened the giant door easily, probably using her quirk to help. She walked in without hesitation, but Izuku stood frozen by the door. "It's the first day and you're already scuffing up school property, you cretin!" "You're kidding me, right?" Ka-chan smirked. "Did your old school put a stick up your ass, or were you just born that way?" Ida sighed. "Let's start over. My name is Tenya Ida and I went to Somei Private." "Somei, huh?" Ka-chan leaned forward threateningly. "You must think you're better then. I'm gonna have fun putting you in your place." Izuku gulped. He knew exactly how terrible it was to have Ka-chan put you in your place. He seriously felt bad for Ida. "Midoriya." Yayorozu waved to him from where she was talking to the ice quirk user from the recommendation exam. "It's so awesome you made it in. Did you end up having to take the normal exam as well?" "No, he didn't. Ida said. At least, I didn't see him there. Midoriya stood frozen from all the attention, but smiled hesitantly at Yaoyorozu. No. I got in on my first try. It's good to see all of you again. What the fuck are you doing here, Deku? Kachan growled. Izuku flinched at Kachan's tone, but before he could respond, Ida was already speaking. Oh! You're the famous Deku-san? He bowed deeply. My brother Tensei speaks very highly of you. Tensei? Izuku tilted his head in confusion. He thought for a minute. Did he know a Tensei that was related to Ida? A hero, maybe? Wait, didn't he think Ida kind of looked like a pro at the entrance exam? What was the nickname he'd given him? Mini Ingenium. Oh, Ingenium! Izuku laughed. Yeah, he's fun to talk to. I tend to work more with his underground sidekicks than I do with him, though. Kachan's scowl deepened. Shota's normal cup of morning coffee never seemed to be enough on the first day of school. Already, he'd had to stop 4 third-year students from pranking the first years, and had to deal with several students accusing him of being lost and wandering into UA on mistake. Yes, he knew he looked like a hobo, but come on! UA security measures wouldn't allow a random homeless person to just walk in. He was almost at his classroom. Time to see how quickly this batch of newcomers would notice him. He was just about to grab his sleeping bag when he heard a small series of explosions coming from his class. What the fuck are you talking about, Deku? A loud voice screamed, and Shota suddenly understood exactly what Deku had meant when he said he could just tell who was using his name as an insult. Why would actual pro heroes ever want to associate with a quirkless loser like you? Just who do you think you are? Please, Bakugo, such behavior is unbecoming of UA students. Shut up, Four Eyes! Please, Kachan, Deku said. Just calm down. Shota didn't wait for his students to notice him, as he normally did on the first day of school. Instead, he slammed the door open with his quirk already activated and a glare strong enough to kill. Deku was hunching in on himself like he always did when he was feeling anxious, and a blonde boy was towering over him, hand still smoking from the use of his quirk only moments before. He was staring at his hands in confusion as the rest of the class looked on in shock. If this is how you think it's appropriate to treat your fellow students, Shota said, then maybe you shouldn't be at UA at all. Deku looked up at him and shook his head frantically, pleading with his eyes for him to not expel the boy. Katsuki Bakugo, if Shota remembered correctly from the class role he'd been given. Shota grit his teeth. On one hand, this kid was the reason that Deku would never truly realize how talented he was, and had bullied him for at least a decade. On the other hand, if Shota expelled the brat now, Deku would blame him for his expulsion, which wouldn't be healthy. Shota took a deep breath and released his quirk. He would give the brat until the end of the day. Hopefully by then, Bakugo would have given himself a concrete reason for expulsion, and he could talk to Nezu. He'd still probably have to talk to Deku and try to prevent him from blaming himself, but that would be more doable if Shota had a specific instance that day to point to. Everyone in your seats. This kind of behavior will not be tolerated, nor will wasting time. He strode to the front of the class. Rational students would understand that. Huh? Bakugo sneered. And just who the fuck are you? Shota glared at him, but it was Deku who answered. This is Eraserhead. He's our teacher. Shota glanced at him softly. Problem child, when we're at school you can just call me Aizawa-sensei. He looked over at the rest of his students. For the rest of you that don't know me, my name is Shota Aizawa, also known as the pro hero Eraserhead. Deku knows me because we've worked together before. You'll probably find that's a pattern with him.
Anyway, let's stop wasting time and just get to it.
He pulled out his sleeping bag and retrieved a gym uniform from inside. The drama of that reveal had probably been lost since he didn't arrive to class bundled up, but oh well.
Put these on and head outside. We'll start with a quirk assessment test.
He then turned on his heel and walked out of the classroom and down the hall, not waiting for the students to catch up. Izuku shook his head and smiled as Aizawa explained that they couldn't waste time on pointless ceremonies. Classic Eraser. He resisted the urge to chuckle when he saw the other students' confused and terrified faces. They obviously hadn't seen the guy give a stray cat half a sandwich to lure it into his capture weapon so he could take it to the vet.
Here at UA, we're not tethered to traditions. That means I get to run my class however I see fit. You've never gotten to use your quirks in physical exams before, and that's just not rational. Bakugo.
Izuku hoped he was imagining how his teacher's voice was laced with hatred.
You got the most points on the entrance exam. What was your farthest distance throw with a softball in middle school? 76 meters.
Kachan's eyes were lit with a challenge.
Try doing it with your quirk.
Aizawa handed Kachan an electric softball, and motioned for him to stand in a circle that was painted on the field.
Anything goes, just stay in the circle.
Kachan smirked.
Alright, you asked for it.
He wound up the ball, letting it loose with an explosion and a scream.
Die!
Kachan's eyes widened. He'd known Kachan was powerful, but that was something else.
All of you need to know your maximum capabilities, Aizawa drawled.
His phone beeped as the ball landed, and he showed the screen to the students, looking slightly disappointed. 705.2 meters.
It's the most rational way of figuring out your potential.
Whoa! I want to go! A lively student with pink hair and skin exclaimed. That looks like fun!
Yeah,
another boy said.
We can use our quirks as much as we want. Fun? Aizawa said seriously. Idiots. Today you'll compete in 8 physical tests to gauge your potential. Whoever comes last has none, and will be expelled immediately.
The students gasped, and Izuku covered his mouth with his hands to hide his smile. Aizawa was trying to scare them into doing their best, and make sure they took their exercise seriously. If the last place could still prove they had potential, Aizawa wouldn't expel them, but they didn't know that. Izuku was tapped on the shoulder by an invisible hand, and he looked over to see a floating uniform. Deku, right? You knew Aizawa-sensei before. Is he really serious about all this? Izuku carefully schooled his expression and shrugged. He has the highest expulsion rate of any teacher in the history of UA. He doesn't have any patience for students with no potential. Yaoyozuru looked at him oddly with one eyebrow raised. Apparently she'd caught on to the fact that he hadn't really answered the question. He smiled slightly and winked, and she nodded and returned the smile. They both turned to look at Aizawa-sensei again.
Wait a minute, Ribbit.
A girl with green hair raised her hand.
Bakugo implied earlier that Deku is quirkless. How is it fair to have all of us use our quirks when he won't be able to?
Izuku called in on himself. He'd hoped to keep his quirklessness a secret for a while longer. Now they were all going to think he didn't have any right to be in the hero course, especially if he managed to come in last on the assessment test. Aizawa only smiled.
Hagakure.
The invisible uniform stood up a little straighter.
Is your quirk going to help you run faster?
No, Aizawa-sensei.
He nodded. And Mineta, is your quirk going to help you throw a ball faster?
A short boy with purple balls for hair shook his head.
You'll all realize that while quirks are helpful and influence your potential, they are not everything. and will not be useful for every situation. You will have to train both your body and your mind to make up for that. I personally do not think that Deku will get last place, even if the rest of you use your quirks, but that is neither here nor there. His strengths lie in his mind. Therefore, at the end, there will be a 9th test. Deku will try to create a strategy for you as a class to take me down. If this strategy works, he will be proven to have potential, even if he comes in last in the physical exams. In addition, if any of you do poorly in the physical exams, this strategy exercise will be your last chance to prove to me that it's no mistake that you're here. Understand? The students nodded and glanced at Izuku in pity, apparently already writing him off. There was no way that a group of students would be able to defeat a pro. Izuku simply ignored the stares. He wasn't planning on getting last in the physical tests. Aizawa wanted the students to go all out, so that's what he would get. Chapter 18. Strategy, Strategy, Strategy. The students looked up at the list Aizawa had projected with the students' names, ranks, and scores in shock. Izuku had narrowly beat Mineta, even though he'd been able to use his quirk in at least the repeated sidestep. Mineta burst into tears, only stopping when Ojido hit him over the head with his tail and reminded him about the strategy exercise. Alright, Deku. Do you have a good understanding of your classmates' quirks? Aizawa asked. When Izuku nodded, he turned to the rest of the class. I will go inside for 5 minutes, and when I return, you will have to try and take me down. He turned and walked away. Good luck. All eyes turned to look at Izuku, who smiled. Okay, so here's what I have in mind. Why should we listen to you, Deku? Bakugo stepped forward, explosions popping from his hands. You're just some quirkless nobody. Izuku took a deep breath. I may not have an awesome quirk like you do, Kachan, but... He screwed his eyes shut. But that doesn't mean I'm useless. There was a long moment of silence before Bakugo huffed. Whatever, nerd. He turned away from the group. There's no way I'm taking orders from you. If any of you other extras know what's up, you'll refuse to follow this useless freak. But whatever. I'm out of here. Kachan went over and sat underneath one of those trees at the far end of the yard. Izuku's eyes lit up. Sitting where he was, Kachan would be the first thing Aizawa would see when he came out, which meant that he, whether he knew it or not, could serve as a distraction to make the rest of the plan work. Ida tossed a flare towards where Kachan was sitting, then turned to the rest of the group. That was uncalled for! Deku has quite the professional reputation, and he is far from useless. Although, he turned to Izuku, the fact that you were quirkless puts your performance during the entrance exam into an entirely different light. I must apologize again for my rudeness that day. It's not a big deal. Izuku waved his hands placatingly, then rubbed the back of his neck. You didn't know I was quirkless, and I try not to tell people if I can help it. Still. Ito pushed his glasses up his nose. It was very impressive. Dude! Kaminari interrupted. Are you really a recommendation student, even though you're quirkless? Izuku nodded. I had the good luck to get to know a few pro heroes in the last year. They recommended me because of my skills in analysis and strategy. Do you know why there are 3 of us in this class? Todoroki's expression was hard to read, but Izuku figured he was confused, since his position as a recommendation student wasn't exactly normal. Politics. He gave a small nervous smile. Nezu figured there'd be a mutiny amongst the parents if a quirkless kid took one of the 4 normal recommendation spots, so he petitioned the school board to add an extra one this year. They officially approved it after seeing my performance in the exam. Not that this isn't interesting, Jiro said briskly, but Aizawa-sensei is going to be coming back any minute. Oh, right, Izuku said. Jiro,
You can hear really well, right? She nodded. Okay, go near the door and listen. Warn us when he's coming back. Jiro nodded and headed off. Koda, you communicate with animals, right?
Koda nodded nervously.
Okay. Could you get us some birds to see where Aizawa-sensei is now? Go stand on the other side of the door with Jiro, so that Aizawa-sensei can't see you both at the same time. That way, even if he cancels out one of your quirks, the other will still have theirs and will be able to warn us if he comes.
What about the rest of us, dude? Kirishima asked, and a few people took an involuntary step back at the wide grin that spread across Izuku's face.
Here's the plan.
As soon as the 5 minutes were up, Shota headed back outside. It would be interesting to see what the problem child would come up with, and would be even more interesting to see if his other students were willing to put aside their biases and listen to him. This was as much a test of his other students to see if they could cooperate as it was a chance for Deku to prove himself. Not that Shota would ever tell them that. He walked out the doors with his quirk already activated, just in case they were planning a blitz attack, but there was no one there. Just Bakugo sitting moodily under a tree. Shota narrowed his eyes. Where were they? All of a sudden, a few objects were thrown in his face from the tree line and exploded when they were just a foot from his face. Flash grenades. Yaoyorozu must have made them. He closed his eyes as soon as he saw the light, then opened them as soon as he thought it was safe, only for them to start watering tearfully. Did the problem child seriously just use tear gas on him? As Shota squinted around, he could slightly see Tokoyami's dark shadow spread out by the main building, and could tell he was hiding other students, but he couldn't tell who. All of a sudden, a patch of thin air tried to push him over. Nice try, Higakure, but he's a trained pro-hero. It's going to take a lot more than that to take him down. He tried to regain his footing like he always did when someone tried to throw him off balance, only to find the ground beneath his feet slick with acid. He sighed. An inconvenience, but not something he'd never faced. All of a sudden, his muscles tensed as an electric shock coursed through him. Crap, acid was conductive. Where was Kaminari hiding? This would be so much easier if he just knew where to look to cancel their quirks, but the students were being careful to hide from him. A shower of small pebbles started pelting him from the tree line. He looked over in that direction, and some of the pebbles slowed down and dropped to the ground as their gravity returned. As if that was a cue, Ojiro, Kirishima, Sato, and Shoji all rushed out from behind trees, equipped with sunglasses and gas masks, and started attacking him, trying to surround him so that he wouldn't cancel all their quirks at once. Shota smiled and readied his capture weapon to take him down, only to find it wouldn't move like it was supposed to. He looked down at it to find that Mineta had thrown his sticky balls all over it, while Shota was distracted by Uraraka's pebbles. He activated his quirk, which was getting painful since the tear gas hadn't dissipated yet, and the balls fell off. He turned back towards the close combat team as they reached him, only to be blinded again by Aoyama's nasal laver. Fine. Even if he couldn't effectively use his quirk, he still had enough battle experience to combat his students based on their movements alone. The close combat team kept up a steady stream of attacks, which combined with the laser and tear gas to disorient Shota just enough that he didn't realize Sarah's tape was reaching out towards his ankle until it was already wrapped around him. He was yanked off his feet, and he saw Ida running with the other end of the tape as he slid down an ice path, apparently made so that he wouldn't get hurt by being dragged at super speeds across rough grounds. Shota slid to a stop at Deku's feet, who smiled at him proudly as he stuck a foot on his chest. "Hey there, Aizawa. Give up?" He sighed heavily and nodded, his body going limp in surrender. "Good work, problem child. Very impressive." He glared at Deku. "But did you have to use the tear gas?" Deku rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "You're always saying not to be afraid to exploit any weaknesses in an opponent." His other students were all yelling and high-fiving each other as they gathered around their downed teacher. "That was awesome!"
Ashido yelled.
Yeah, super manly!
Shota extricated himself from the tape and stood, putting eye drops in.
Yeah. Good work, brats. Don't let this go to your head, though. You'll never have a 20-on-1 fight in your hero careers.
He stood up straighter.
And now for the expulsions.
The group went silent, with the exception of Mineta, who started crying again, as he stared up at Shota with fear. Shota gave a deranged smile.
It was a logical ruse.
Several students started crying along with Mineta, who had switched to tears of relief as Deku practically fell over from laughter. Yaoyorozu shrugged. I thought that was obvious from the beginning. A bell rang in the school, signaling lunchtime, and his students practically ran towards the building.
Deku!
Shota called out. Deku paused and looked up at him with wide, worried eyes, but Shota just smiled softly.
You did good, problem child.
Deku gave a smile so bright that it should be illegal. Thanks, Aizawa.
Whatever.
He raised an eyebrow.
You better get going unless you want to miss lunch.
Oh, right. Izuku started to run to catch up with his classmates, and waved over his shoulder. See you later, Aizawa. Shota chuckled and shook his head, heading towards his office to get his super extra strength eye drops and rest his eyes for the next lesson. Izuku walked through the too-full cafeteria, balancing his tray and trying to find an empty table, as had been his habit since he'd been diagnosed quirkless. Trying to sit with other people was just asking for trouble. Which was part of the reason he was so confused when Uraraka enthusiastically waved at him and motioned for him to come sit by her and eat her. He looked behind him, expecting to see Ashido or maybe Jiro behind him, but the only other person she could have been waving at was some kid with purple hair that Izuku didn't know. Judging by the slightly raised eyebrow the purple kid was giving him, he didn't know Uraraka either. Which meant she was waving at Izuku. Oh no. Izuku slowly went to go sit next to her, wondering if this was some kind of trick. It had to be, right? He was quirkless and Kachan had made sure everyone knew it, so why would anyone be nice to him? Deku! Uraraka said cheerfully. That was super cool how you came up with a plan to beat Aizawa-sensei. You're super smart. Izuku chuckled nervously, waiting for her to mock him, but she never did. Instead, she turned to her food, as if nothing else needed to be said. Izuku just looked at her in shock. What was happening? Yes, it was very impressive, although we did have to use some underhanded tricks to win. Ida frowned. However, it does appear that was the only way to win. Izuku nodded. Yeah, Risa's hard to counter because he can cancel your quirks, so you kind of have to be willing to fight dirty if you're going to beat him. It's the same with some villains. He shrugged. I'm planning on being an underground hero, so fighting dirty is kind of part of the package. Still, Ida said, I wish we didn't have to resort to such tricks. Oh, lighten up, Ida! We won, didn't we? And no one got expelled. Uraraka hit him softly on the shoulder, and Ida looked like he didn't know whether this was normal or if he was supposed to scold her for it. Yo, Deku! Kirishima clapped him on the back as he, Ashido, Sero, and Kaminari passed by on their way to another table. That was super manly how you beat Aizawa-sensei. We're looking forward to getting to know you better this year. Izuku blushed and looked at him with wide eyes. Oh, okay. I didn't really do much. I left most of the fighting to you guys. Don't be so modest, dude. Kaminari laughed. Compared to a bunch of hopeless idiots like us, you're a regular genius. You're not... Sarah cut Izuku off by laying a hand on his shoulder. It's okay. We have other strengths, but intelligence just isn't one of them, and there's no use denying that. Ooh! Ashido smiled. Let's go sit next to Bakugo. He's trying to be all surly over by himself.
Izuku genuinely hoped Kachan didn't explode them immediately. They were too nice to die young. Shortly after their group left, Yaoyorozu caught Izuku's eye from across the cafeteria and headed over with her tray, dragging a blank-faced Todoroki behind her. "Hey, Midoriya," she said as they sat down. "Or do you prefer to be called Deku? It seems to be what Aizawa-sensei and Bakugo both call you, and they seem to have known you the longest." Izuku shrugged. "I don't really care at this point. Deku's the name I use for analysis work I do for Underground Heroes, so it's gonna be my hero name. That's why Eraser calls me that. You can just call me whatever, I guess." "I like Deku," Araka said. "It has a you-can-do-it vibe to it." Izuku laughed. "You know, you're not the first person to tell me that." "You already know your hero name?" Ida said in surprise. Izuku nodded. "As weird as it is to already have one, I already have a reputation, so it wouldn't make any sense to change it. I've even already been asked to give an autograph or two." He immediately slapped his hands over his mouth. No, why did he say that? They were gonna think he was bragging, and then they'd hate him, and... The others were staring at him wide-eyed, and then Uraraka started laughing. "You're gonna go underground and you're already famous? Sign me up!" The others, with the exception of Todoroki, joined in on the laughter. Izuku turned bright red and tried to sputter out some excuse, but the others just ignored him. The lunch hour continued like that, with Izuku gradually getting more comfortable around these... friends? Was that what they were? Izuku didn't know. It still felt like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. They were going to walk together back to the classroom, but Izuku let the others go on ahead as he used the bathroom. As he headed back, he spotted Aizawa off in a side hallway. "Deku." Izuku was glad that Aizawa's eyes looked a little less red than they had. He still felt really bad for having Yaoyorozu make tear gas during the exercise. "How was lunch?" "It was great." Izuku grinned. "Everyone's really nice. It's so different from middle school." Aizawa scowled, but let it slide, which Izuku was grateful for. Instead, Aizawa just frowned at Izuku's tie. "Problem child, what did you even do to make a piece of fabric look like that?" Izuku smiled sheepishly. "Well, my dad's not really around to teach me, and Mum never learned, so... Let's just say you can learn anything on YouTube, but some things are more difficult than others. Don't worry though, I'll get the hang of it." Aizawa just huffed and grabbed Izuku's tie, untying it and retying it much neater, while Izuku looked at him in shock. "Problem child." He shook his head as he tucked the other end of his tie under Izuku's blazer and squeezed his shoulder. "Get to class. You wouldn't want to be late for your first official heroics lesson." "Yes, sir," Izuku said. And Aizawa tilted his head like he did when he was trying to hide a smile. Izuku slipped into the room and went to his seat, unfortunately right behind Kachan. He still wasn't quite sure how to feel about him. Kachan had been his first friend, but ever since he'd made other friends, it had kind of tossed his whole perspective of their relationship on his head. Especially since Aizawa and the others insisted that no one who treated him like Kachan did could really be his friend. Kachan glared at him as he passed, letting off a few intimidating pops of his quirk, before huffing and turning to face forward as the bell rang. Izuku wondered who their heroics teacher would be. Probably one of the more combat-orientated teachers like Snipe or Ectoplasm. Oh, this year is gonna be great. A loud bang sounded, and everyone flinched as the door slammed open. Izuku's eyes widened at the sight of their new heroics teacher, who was grinning at the class in all his muscled glory. "I am here!"